Ben Britton, an academic who studies volunteers in policing internationally, and I'm delighted to continue our series of interviews on policing TV with experts and leaders from around the world on volunteers in policing by being joined today by Ben Haiman. So, Ben, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today, and it's a pleasure to talk with you always. Ben Heyman, I am a police reservist in Washington, D.C. I'm also the former chief of staff and executive director of professional development for that agency. I too am in academia, both completing my PhD work at Staffordshire University in the UK and doing some teaching myself. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Been a reservist for well over a decade, and looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you. And can you give us a brief history of how you came to be involved in volunteer policing in the first place?
Absolutely. So I went to college to be a high school math teacher. I'm just on almost a 20-year detour right now in law enforcement. For me, I had started my career with the Metropolitan Police. I'd been working in IT system development and HR and a bunch of other areas. One of the members that was working on my team suggested that I consider applying for this reserve thing. And you know, it sounded interesting, and he's like, "Look, if nothing else, you'll go through the academy and you'll learn a lot, and you might find you enjoy it." And obviously, I have. I've stayed with it for a good period of time. It's an experience like no other. You get to meet people that folks you would not ordinarily come across in situations you would not normally come through, and then really, you know, being able to problem solve and think about building community in a different way. Volunteer policing offers those insights and abilities that is really unique to any other type of volunteerism.
The reserve model in the Metropolitan Police, Washington, D.C., is internationally recognised, and I know there's been a lot of changes in how it works in recent years. Can you give us a sense of how that whole unit operates and about some of the ways that that's shifted from how it used to work in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. The Metropolitan Police has a long history with its police reservist program, dating all the way back to actually 1948 when the program was first established. It was first deployed in 1951 on Halloween to guard various call boxes and communities throughout Washington. The program has gone through a lot of different iterations, and I was very fortunate to be able to lead a lot of the changes in the early 2010s to help make the program what it is today. Looking at different models of policing, in particular in the U.S., we were able to put together really a comprehensive reservist program. Our reservists are police officers, certified police officers, just like any other member of the Metropolitan Police. But with that comes an extraordinary obligation for the members to go through the full background selection process and the full police academy before starting their volunteerism. It's done on nights and weekends, but it is at least a year commitment just to get through the initial academy training portion, and then there's additional field training requirements. So members that come in essentially every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday for a better part of a year and 3 weeks full time. They go through hands-on training where they learn the knowledge, skills, and ability to serve as a police officer. The academy experience, it's very interesting with reserve classes, and I've had the pleasure of teaching in the Reserve Academy for many iterations. You get really, really smart groups of people that are very well accomplished. So you can move through material a little bit quicker just because the class sizes are smaller and folks generally have multiple degrees. We always have a PhD somewhere in there too, so they ask a lot of why questions. So that slows it down, but otherwise the academy experience moves very quickly for the reserve program. And afterwards, members go through a field training experience, which they have up to 2 years to complete. It's based on the same standard as our career officers. And then after that, they serve the communities of Washington, D.C. They're assigned to one of our different 7 districts, and they have a monthly service requirement of 24 hours per month, which is a pretty substantial time commitment. But what we find is a lot of volunteers far exceed that because they just love doing the work. And I know for myself, you know, both personally and professionally. A lot of my colleagues and friends that I stay in touch with all come from the reserve program. So it's just an incredible network of people that really, care about our community, care about service, and want to make a difference through a very unique opportunity.
You bring a lot of senior strategic police leadership experience yourself, and often reserve and volunteer policing doesn't feel very prominent on the agendas of senior police leaders. How do you think we might go about changing that and getting this more seen and recognised by senior people in policing, do you think?
Well, I'm going to give you an answer that surprises you a little bit, Ian. That's not necessarily a bad thing all the time that the senior folks aren't thinking about that. From my experience serving in, very prominent and senior roles within law enforcement, often we're dealing with crisis after crisis after crisis. And the fact that the reserve program is not on that agenda is a very good thing and says something about, the stability and the quality of the volunteer program. What I will say is reserves tend to not market themselves nearly for all that they could. And so the more information that reserve teams can share about what they're doing, and the successes they're having, that goes a long way. So, like one of the things that we did in Washington is start a monthly newsletter called The Lookout. And we would put out information about who our reserves are, what they're contributing, the impact that they're having, any notable things, and we'd send that to the entire command staff distribution. And all of a sudden, that narrative started changing. People started recognizing the great work that the reserve team was doing. I know for our leadership team on the career service or the paid side, they love the reserve program. They value it. They, just a couple nights ago, they had the team out in one of the homicide reduction areas, and the reserve team actually got someone who is tied to a homicide case in D.C. Right, and that certainly was something that they wanted to recognize. I think and that has been a change. I mean, really, it comes with the credibility of the program, the quality of the people, the impact that they're having, but then also increasing that visibility. I think the other thing that's important is volunteers need a thank you. And so, one of the things that I was fortunate to find private funding to do was an annual recognition banquet just for the reserve members. A chance for us to say, thank you so much for your service. Thank you for going through all these very challenging circumstances and going through essentially the life of a police officer, but not being compensated for it. And that one thank you, even if on an annual basis, from the chief and the chief executives, really carries volunteers through a lot of more challenging kind of moments in policing. And when we look at some of our reservists who've been there for 20, 30 years, that's a full career. I mean, and the stories they have, the experiences they have, I would say rival any of their career counterparts. Yeah, they might only do it a few days a month, but the quality of the service that they're providing is top notch, and that's one of the things consistently that any of the chief executives of our department recognizes. When you put a reserve member out there, you're not just getting a person who's sitting on a particular location. You're getting somebody who wants to be out there, who wants to engage with the community, who wants to make an impact, and they do so with every shift that they take.
In the UK, we don't have many paid personnel who have been regular paid service police officers and then who come over to be what in the UK would be our volunteer special constables, either when they resign and move on from policing or ultimately when they retire from policing. And I think that's a bit more of a common thing in the States. Why do you think yourselves have more of that, and do you think there's any advantages of that?
Certainly, I've seen it play out in different jurisdictions. In D.C., we have a few former career officers that become reservists. Some, are resigning earlier in their career but aren't fully ready to give up law enforcement, but they might have gotten some good paying consulting job or teaching job or something where life is calling them in a different direction, but they're not still fully ready to not do police work. But in some jurisdictions, police reservists can work off-duty or part-time compensated roles, and that really motivates some former career members to still be able to continue that type of work. I think there's a challenge with retention still on the for former career officers that are switching into the reserve program. And what I find too important, at least from a leadership element, is ensuring the two kind of populations of reservists feel very well connected with each other. When you can get that connection to happen, you find the former career officers willing to stay around a lot longer and kind of get entrenched. But ensuring that really there is not a difference in terms of, hey, you're part of the reserve team, and I look at one of our former sergeants that retired, and then served about 10 years as a reservist. And if you asked him when he joined, he's like, yeah, the reserves are the mechanism for me to continue my service. But then if you asked him near the end, he would talk about how the reserve team is really the team he's a part of, and how he identifies with the department. And that's really to be a tribute to the women and men that are volunteering their time, and just the credibility that they have in the service they provide.
My perspective, looking over from the UK towards the US, is that law enforcement in the US is quite a complex picture, with many, many thousands of agencies, a quite wide variation in practice between them, very large agencies, very small agencies. How much do we actually know about what the volunteer policing picture looks like across all of those agencies? And I suppose are there key gaps in our knowledge at a national level across the country?
Well, Ian, you raise a fantastic point, and your work right now is, I would say, what we know most about in terms of volunteer policing. You're really leading the efforts right now to actually put some scholarship around this, and certainly there have been reviews and thoughts, and I think one of the more prominent documents is in the early 1990s. But there's just an absence of research, and that's really challenging, in particular in a context like the United States, where you do have 18,000 different agencies. You have widely varying standards across different states. In the U.S., when you say police reservist, it can mean everything from a non-uniformed, paid officer to a volunteer, fully trained. So just the lexicon really matters in that as well. I think the more that can be known and documented about successful reserve programs, the ability for reserve programs to make an impact, it gives something for politicians and leaders in law enforcement to fall back on, to say, oh, what we're doing, actually there is some sort of evidence base and how to do it best and how to do it properly. I'm a full believer in training, and you can't take training away from folks. And so the more that police reservists have identical standards, identical training to career counterparts, it makes them a more valuable asset. The more difference you have in that, the vulnerabilities in terms of duties, in terms of responsibilities exist. But really that comes back to this idea about increasing the caliber of the knowledge that's out there. And certainly in some of the international convenings which you have helped create that opportunity, you certainly see how different cultures and different communities think about volunteering and policing. Some agencies, it's 25% of their national police force are volunteers, right? And that's the way it's always been. And so, I think it's, as you look broader nationally, there's just this opportunity to bring more people into law enforcement through voluntary service, and it really has such a wide impact on the community in such a positive way. Every chief in America should want to bring community members in to serve, to give their time back, to connect the agency back to policing. It brings in a pot of resources. It costs some to train and operate, but not nearly compared to the value that they get from the members within the program. But it takes knowledge and leadership and well-documented examples of how this is successful.
And one of the great ways in which volunteer police can come together is through the Volunteer Law Enforcement Officers Alliance. Can you give us a sense of how that came about and what it does?
The Volunteer Law Enforcement Officers Alliance have been a part of for a better part of a decade, and on the board of advisors for a good number of years. It is a fantastic network of people. Well, I can't specifically speak of the origins of the organization. What I can say is it's an opportunity to bring volunteers serving in law enforcement, passionate about this service, together from all around the world, literally all around the world, to exchange ideas, thoughts, participate in training to get to meet each other, and like any conference or any association where police are involved, people are always comparing and saying, well, here's what we do, here's what you do. But through that, it serves really as an exchange for ideas. And I know I've brought back a good number of things from that network to say, hey, we should try this, or we should consider this, or this is something that another agency is doing. And similarly, I think we've been able to contribute to that. Every year, the annual conference is a great opportunity for people to come together, meet new colleagues from around the world. There's always professional interests outside of policing as well. There's just a lot of overlap with different careers people have chosen. But then within policing, it's always fun to be around other volunteers who are passionate about what they do. VLOA over the last several years really has, I think, expanded and become truly an international organization. A lot of the early work was really U.S. based. And despite American exceptionalism, having the opportunity to just step into other departments around the world and kind of see and understand what they do, I think has been rewarding for everyone. And I'm looking forward to seeing future conferences and future exchanges and discussions that the VLOA network pulls together.
In many places around the world, sadly, volunteer policing seems to be shrinking in terms of numbers and scale. Do you have a sense of what might be driving some of that? And also, I guess, specifically in the US context, do you think it's become harder to attract people in, onboard them, and keep them in volunteer roles?
I agree with your statement. I would say that you can drop the word volunteering, and the statement is equally true. 3 years ago or 4 years ago at the Metropolitan Police, we had almost 4,000 police officers. Now, today, it's just over 3,300. And and I'm talking about career service officers. And I've been involved in police recruitment for a better part of 15 years. I work with it nationally. Recently led a conference with over 250 agencies from all across the country, and everyone is describing the challenges with recruitment. I don't think volunteer policing is different in that sense, other than you also have to find the type of person who's willing to do that work with no compensation. But I think some of the challenges that we're seeing broadly on recruitment nationally in the profession also affect volunteer policing. As agencies consider, requiring full law enforcement qualifications and standards and training, that certainly makes it more challenging. Not everyone walks around and says, oh, I have a free year to give up to go essentially get another master's degree or to get a master's degree. I just have that time and then want to give 24 hours a month of non-compensated work after that. So yes, I think it is challenging to recruit people, but I think that there's waves, right? If you look in our country after September 11th, there was a huge influx of individuals coming into volunteer services, wanting to give an impact. And I think it's creating that motivation for people, and that call for people into public service. And creating the opportunity to be something that's known. As much as it's unknown within law enforcement, outside it's even kind of less message, right? And so I think as a profession within volunteer law enforcement, we have to do our part to share the word about what it is, to increase the opportunity for people to gain understanding about how to serve in that capacity, to talk about it to friends, family, to kind of leverage that recruitment network. When I look at people that joined our reserve program, yeah, sure, you get some that just randomly stumbled through the website, right? And it was like, oh, I didn't realize they had this. I always wanted to do it. But you also have a lot through word of mouth, through existing reservists that mention it to other people who recruit them into the program. And so, being very strategic and focused on how to do that is critically important. And I think, at least in the U.S. context, the last few years in policing nationally with a narrative have been really challenging for people to say, yeah, I really want to join something where there's huge public scrutiny, there's widespread dis-support for the service. But we're seeing those polls rebound recently. There was a poll that was just released showing huge increases in public sentiment, in particular with young people. towards the sentiment of law enforcement, that will be helpful too for volunteer opportunities to kind of raise that caliber of people wanting to come in.
You recently attended the International Symposium on Volunteer Policing in Edinburgh, Scotland. Do you think there's a lot we can learn from one another as we sort of work out how to plot that way through the future of developing volunteer policing in our respective countries?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought the conference was fantastic. The dialogue was amazing. The representation from around the world was really, quite first caliber. And yes, I mean, I think the more that we can look at models of what are being done and be able to figure out how those models can adapt to our local communities, the greater chance we have to make an impact. Volunteer firefighting in the U.S. at least is something that everyone knows, everyone understands, and it's a model that's widely replicated throughout, small communities and large communities throughout the country. Volunteer policing does not have that same kind of knowledge base, and I think opportunities like that exchange in Scotland, and hopefully many future ones where people can say, oh, so your volunteers do this. Oh, how do they help? It gives people ideas for additional ways of service, different opportunities, different ways to bring people in. And then for volunteers that are in there, it also creates a community, which is really important, right? When you feel like you're part of something that's bigger than just you, bigger than your agency, but it's part of a international, group of people that are doing work, that's huge. So I think the more of those type of opportunities, the better it will be for volunteer policing around the globe.
Thank you, Ben Haiman, for some really interesting strategic insights across the diverse world of volunteer policing, both in the US and internationally. Volunteers are a major part of policing in so many different countries, and yet rarely perhaps get that strategic attention, or as you rightly say, the wider public awareness that they deserve. So very much enjoyed speaking with you and look forward to future dialogue in times to come.
My pleasure, Ian, and likewise. And what I'll say is a lot of volunteers don't want to come into policing only to do marketing work, which might be their day job. And so we certainly have to do a great job, selling the story of who's in volunteer policing. You're doing your part with really elevating this on an international level, and I look forward to supporting in any way that I can the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.